Sometimes in life and leadership, the future can feel foggy. So today we're going to begin a two-part conversation called The Zone of the Unknown. We're going to talk about how do you stay focused as a leader in the midst of ambiguity.
Hey, what's up, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Echo Leadership Podcast. My name is David Hibiske, and I'm here with Andy Wood. And Andy, this podcast is going to be one for the record books.
Yep.
Because we're going to be talking about some big news that probably a lot of our listeners have already heard if they're on social or email, and maybe they haven't, though. But this talk today, as we jump into the zone of the unknown, is coming straight out of this season that you've been walking through, and this is about your new role and about your transition from Echo Church. So can you talk just a little bit about that?
So this conversation today actually was from my journal in the midst of this crazy season that we've been walking through. In fact, this became a staff talk that we did here at Echo. And we shared this talk before the news had come out. So several of our staff members are sitting there listening, and there were a few who already knew about the transition, some that didn't. And it was almost like two different leadership talks, one for the group that knew that the transition was coming, the others didn't. But if you didn't know, so I've been serving here at Echo. Stacy and I have been here now for 14 years. So as we record this, I'm actually still on staff at Echo, and I'll be in the role of lead pastor through the end of June. And then beginning in July, I'll transition to Saddleback Church, which was founded by Rick and Kay Warren. I'll be serving there for 2 months. I'll be serving on staff, and then as Pastor Rick Warren transitions from the lead pastor or senior pastor role there, I'll be appointed the next senior pastor of this incredible historical church. And Stacy and I are so excited about that role, and it comes with a lot of joy, anticipation, lots of emotion here on the Echo side as well, because we love the staff, the team here, the church that we've been able to do ministry with. And so we've been walking through this zone of the unknown really for the last 3 months of our lives since we began a conversation with Saddleback. And this is going to be a really practical look at, for those who are in the midst of ambiguity, which I think so many people walk through that at different seasons of their lives. How do you get the most out of that season and stay focused?
Yeah, so we'll be unpacking, I'm sure, a little bit more about your experience, your emotions, and even just the processing through this zone of the unknown. And I think it's going to be really helpful as we jump in. Now, we did want to say a couple things with this transition coming up. That means we're going to be making a couple changes with the podcast.
Yes.
So we are still going to be working on bringing great content to all of our listeners to help leaders get better in their leadership. But we are going to be rebranding the podcast.
And we've got some different ideas that we're rolling around with, and by early fall, we'll have that ready to roll.
Yeah, so this will be same content or same heartbeat of helping leaders get better, but different name, different brand will be coming to the podcast. So this is what you can do to help keep up with what's happening, keep into the tribe of leaders who are wanting to get better in their leadership. Go ahead right now, whatever platform you're listening on, subscribe, be keeping up with the podcast right now, because that'll help you keep informed when changes come. You can also go to echo.church/leadership podcast. That's echo.church/leadership podcast. And you can drop in your email there, and you will be informed whenever we announce the changes and rebrand the podcast, and you'll keep up with us.
Awesome,
man. So let's jump into some content today, Andy. We're doing a 2-part talk. So this is part 1 today, talking about the zone of the unknown, ambiguity, every leader's favorite place to be, where they don't know what's in front of them.
And most leaders tend to see into the future. They love to look ahead and plan ahead and come up with strategy and action steps. But sometimes in life and leadership, it's not so clear. And when you get into that place, your response is super important. On a Strength Finder, so most people have probably heard you come down with your top 5 strengths. Mine almost always are these 3: futuristic, strategic, and activator. And so when I get into a space where I don't know the future, it's hard for me personally. But what I've discovered is oftentimes when the future is unknown, that's like the breeding ground for some of the best growth as a person. It's a breeding ground for teams getting stronger, and it's really a great opportunity to clarify some really important aspects of leadership. And so this talk is really about when you're in that, what are some things that you can do when you don't know what to do?
That's going to be awesome. So I think that there's a growth that you're alluding to that happens there. What is it about those seasons for you that really produce that atmosphere? Like, is it because you feel totally dependent on God or others? Like, what is the part for you? Because you're futuristic, you're a hard charger, you're ready to go.
Yeah.
Or is it more the fact that it feels like maybe your brakes get tapped and you can't move?
Yeah.
What's the growth in you?
I think that every season of ambiguity, different character traits are being cultivated. I would certainly say one thing that is cultivated in ambiguity is patience, because you're forced into a spot where you can't maybe move as fast as you did before, or you have to be more patient with process. You have to wait on specific things to come clearer. So I would say patience is a huge part of that. And then, sometimes when you're in these zones, you actually, the process of trying to figure out what to do is coupled with confusion internally. So for leaders, so often we attach our identity to what we do. And maybe if you're not as successful or fruitful or effective, and you find yourself in a season like that, it's a really good opportunity to analyze and ask questions about what am I relying upon? What am I going to for security and confidence? And so I have found many times in my life where you're making progress. It's good to learn from your progress, but you can start to let that progress affect the way you see yourself. And then when that's stripped away, you have to come back to basics. And so I think that there's so much from a character standpoint, but I also think that this is important because so much of life and leadership is the zone of the unknown. There are so many things in your life that are currently in the zone of the unknown. And you have to have good strategies that allow you in those seasons to keep moving forward. Because if you wait till everything is, all the ambiguity in life is gone, then you'll never move forward or never move on anything. Yeah. So I think it's one part character, and it's another part actually the basics of leading through ambiguity.
Yeah. So if you're listening today, I bet that you are able to start thinking about where's that area of ambiguity in your life. There's probably an employee that you don't know how to deal with. There's an environmental constraint that's around you. There's some type of budget concern. There's a major life change. Andy, you're going through a life change, changing roles. So wherever that place of ambiguity is for you, I would encourage you right now, maybe just write it down or write down a couple of those. What are a couple of thoughts, feelings? Just at least think about those as we jump into this talk today. That's
really good. I also wanted to highlight some of my thoughts here were originally inspired by a book called Nonsense. And the book, it's a good book. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that you go read the whole book, but the general concept of the book I think is worth highlighting. And what the author makes a case for is this idea of an open and closed loop. So what he says in the book is that, the brain, even like when you look at video games, why people keep playing the video games, or if you're listening to a song and like if you heard the Echo leadership jingle and you only heard like 3/4 of it, you would want to hear the rest of it. Or when you're hearing a song, there's not closure to it. Somebody was sharing with me the other day about singing a song. You know how sometimes you can get like a line from a song stuck in your head, and then you just you play that, you sing that song, that line over.
My wife loves that.
Yeah, my wife loves that too. When I do that, she'll sometimes say to me like, "Do you remember any of the other lines of the song?" But somebody had told me recently that I think is connected to this. The only way, the way to get your brain to stop replaying that one line is to sing the whole song, because the closure allows your brain to move on. So you close the loop. But sometimes in our life there are loops that are just still open-ended, and they're not meant to be closed yet. And so the brain can be fishing or working towards closure
Yeah.
when it's not time yet to bring closure. I also find this to be true from a spiritual standpoint, that there are times where God is at work in our lives, and there's something that he just wants you to be in this zone where it's unknown, and there's not closure yet, and you have to wait, and you have to trust, and you have to learn, and you have to grow. And if you try so hard to bring closure when closure is not supposed to be created, you'll short circuit some of the things that God wants to do in you. You'll short circuit growth, short circuit character development. And so asking the question, when there is a loop that is opened, is this a loop that is supposed to be closed? So for example, let's go back to, I'm not even into my practical stuff yet. I mean, this is practical, but my big ideas, like you take the idea for let's say you got a staff challenge and you don't know what to do. Well, that's a loop that you probably need to press through to get a sense of, okay, I need to do these things. But let's say that you're in a relationship, and that relationship, you're not quite certain if you're supposed to marry a person yet, but you have to walk through a process to get to a place of closure. And if you push that process too fast, you might get to the wrong decision prematurely. So it's like having the discernment to say, is this a loop that God intends to remain open, or is this a loop that God intends for me to push through and bring closure?
Yeah, so that's a great point. And as people are listening to this right now, so you got a leader who's trying to discern, is this one that should be closed? Is it one that should stay open? There's maybe 3 different categories you're thinking through. Yourself, you're in that zone, your team, maybe even your organization. So any advice for a leader listening, and they're trying to discern, should this loop be open or closed? They want it closed, because we always lean towards wanting that thing closed. Any advice is to lean in there for personal, team, organization?
It's a great question. So one thing for sure is to not let the pressure of the situation force you into a bad decision or a premature decision. The pressure in the situation, unless you're like in a, urgent situation that, life altering thing.
So let's define that, because I think the pressure, a lot of times, leadership is often painful, and there's often pressure. There's blessings, but there's a lot of burden, and that's the weight that's carried.
Okay, so maybe let's take it one step further. Yeah, I think you're right. It's not just pressure. Maybe it's expectation. So don't let somebody else's expectation or your own expectation push you. So I'll give a couple examples. When you're looking at a decision, like let's say, for example, let's go back to that marriage decision. Like your date, a teenager or a young person, young singles dating somebody. What's all the right things that you would need to know before you would be able to finalize that decision? And usually most big decisions can be broken down into phases. So like, for example, when Saddleback hired me, there were phases that we went through. And, it's phase 1, we're doing this, phase 2, we're doing this, I think most big decisions, to break it down into phases, is really helpful. And then I would say really trying to discern, when does this decision need to be made by? Like if you're 20 and you're getting pressure from the person you're dating, or, if somebody's 20 and they're getting pressure, then it's like, well, hold off. This is a decision I don't need to make right now. I don't need to make this decision for another couple of years. So you can remove some of that expectation that is surrounding the decision, to know you're going to live in a period of ambiguity that is a process of revelation, that over time things are getting clearer and clearer, but you don't want to short circuit that and bring a date way closer. Now you might look at something like, for example, a staff. Let's go back to the staff, or let's say that you've got something with a child, you're dealing with some behavior issue with a kid, and you're like, you don't want to deal with it. It's ambiguous. It's how do I give them consequences? Do I do how big of a deal? And it's like, okay, well, a lot of times I'll do this with my kids. I'm like, I don't know yet what's the right solution for this conversation, but I'm gonna say, okay, to the kid, when you get home from sports tonight or tomorrow or whatever, we're gonna have a conversation about this. So then I know, okay, well, between now and tomorrow at 8 p.m. I've got to think through how I'm going to deal with this with my child. So it's like trying to discern what that timeline is, and then it helps force clarity.
Mm-hmm. So that was going to be one of the questions I was going to have, and I think maybe you're answering it there. But for leaders, when they're saying, as I work with my team or my staff, you could come into the unknown, and for some people, it'll be an excuse to put the brakes on, where some want to continue to push the gas. So maybe even in those phases, would you say the advice is to set a deadline, even if it's a artificial deadline, like I need to make a decision by this point, and so we can at least move.
Yeah.
Is that what you would find is helpful?
Yeah. And sometimes you have to say, well, I'm not going to be able to make a decision, but I'm going to be able to decide when I'm going to make a decision by this point.
There you go.
So like, for example, is another funny thing when we raised support for our church plants, we brought all these churches in and they were going to partner with us. And all those churches weren't going to be able to make a quick decision on how much money they're going to give to us as we're starting. But Steve Stroop, one of my mentors, so brilliant, would say, okay, I want you to let us know on a card when you're going to let us know when you're going to decide.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, well, within 6 weeks, I can let you know when I can decide. And so sometimes you have to break it down like that to get more clarity.
So maybe wherever you are in your zone of the unknown, figure out your phase that you're in, and maybe even start thinking about that deadline for when you need to make a decision or move into that next phase.
It's good.
All right, so let's jump in and get practical, Andy. I know you've got some great points here that are going to be some handles for people to hold on to as they walk through that unknown. So let's go ahead and jump into those.
That's great. I'll give you just, for those of you who are followers of Jesus, and even if you're not, these some really helpful stories from the Bible. One is Abram was called by God to go from the place that he had grown up in to a new land. And God said to him, go to the land that I will show you. So he doesn't tell him like where he's going. He just tells him, go to the place that I will show you where you're going. And God is guiding him with direction, not destination. And I think that that's a really important principle, that sometimes we're so focused on the destination and not focused enough on the direction. So I've discovered in my own journey, God will not always give me destination, but he always will give me direction. And even when I don't know the destination, I can still know the direction that I'm supposed to be moving in. So I would encourage people to distinguish out destination and direction. And you can see this a lot in the Bible. Another verse from the Bible I love, God says, I'll guide you along the best pathway for your life. I'll instruct you and watch over you. And then he says after this, don't be like a senseless horse or a mule that needs a bit and a bridle to keep it under control. So the image is of somebody walking alongside and guiding. So God wants to guide us along the best pathway for our lives. Doesn't always make the destination clear. So we're going to do this in two parts since it's a long conversation, but I'm going to start with the first one, which is, so we're going to call it growing through life's unknowns. The first of these is to remember your foundation. And that means, sometimes when you don't know what to do, you have to return to what you know. Let me say it one more time. Sometimes when you don't know what to do, you have to return to what you already know. And sometimes in confusion, and this is spiritual as much as it is practical, that God is the author. He is the author and perfecter of our faith, but he's also the originator or the source of truth. And what can happen is in confusion, you can get pushed off of truth and sometimes even lose grounding on the things that you already know to be true. So it's bringing yourself back to solid foundation, solid ground that you're standing on. It really does help you in seasons of ambiguity.
Yeah. So obviously for you, as a pastor, this is, like you said, this is very much spiritual. So you're coming back to, who does God say you are? You're looking at Scripture as foundations. What are other things that maybe you look to remind you of your foundation, or what's true when so you can stand?
Yeah, I think if I were to break it down, like for a leader, and then I'll come back to myself personally, I think having a core set of principles and a core set of like convictions that you hold somewhere that okay, these are the convictions that I have about leadership, about myself, about life. Like one of the key lines that we use oftentimes, facts are your friends. Or, when you withhold the truth, that's not love. So in a relationship, you have grace and truth together. There's a lot of these little axioms and truths and foundations that you can come back to. Sometimes in ambiguity, there are different seasons of ambiguity.
Mm-hmm.
So personally, like I've gone through some really tough seasons at home in parenting. And, I'll come back to, okay, what are the things that I know about parenting? I know God loves my kids way more than I love my kids.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I come back to that, it's like, okay, well, that gives me grounding. Or I know a lot of kids that have gone through really difficult seasons of life, and they've ended up to be great adults. So just because we're in this season right now, I also know that my identity is not tied up to my kids and who their behavior, and they're humans and they're making their own choices. So I might take a situation like this and write down,
Mm-hmm.
or for example, let's say that you're trying to make a decision about a facility and you're trying to decide, okay, well, do we do this now? Do we do this later? I might try to get as practical as I can to say, okay, what do we know from a foundational standpoint about building and why we build, and so
Mm-hmm.
breaking it down and then coming back to the truth, and some of that can be factual truth, some of it can be principled truth,
Mm-hmm.
and then for those of us who are followers of Jesus, coming all the way to the sense of confidence in God as the foundation. That I've walked through tremendous seasons of ambiguity in my life, tremendous seasons of uncertainty, and God got me through it. So that foundation is so huge.
Well, I think that's so good, because so often when we're in ambiguity, it is not necessarily what's happening around us, the external. It's usually the internal. It's our thinking.
Mm-hmm.
That I know your thought starts spinning. You're trying to close a loop. You find yourself, that's where anxiety is created, insecurities happen, all these things happen and begin in our mind. I heard John Acuff in his Soundtracks book,
Mm-hmm.
he shared 3 questions that help in this, that go, when you find yourself in this place, is it true? Is it helpful? And is it kind?
Mm.
And it's ways to test those thoughts to remind you of that foundation. So is it true? Is it helpful? Is it kind?
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions that you would say that have been helpful for you in discerning your foundation in a zone of the unknown?
Yeah, one question that is so helpful for me is, what is the lie that I am accepting right now that I should be rejecting? So usually when we're swayed and we're knocked off in any area of life or leadership, there's some lie that I'm allowing myself to receive that I should be rejecting.
Really
I was doing that question this morning in my journal. What's the lie I'm receiving that I should be rejecting?
Yeah.
Because when I'm standing on lies, and I should say when I'm believing lies, I'm not standing on a solid foundation.
That's really good. So we want to remember your foundation. And what's the second thing that we want to talk about?
Okay, so when you think about like being in a season of ambiguity, one thing that happens to the brain is the brain becomes a sponge for new information. And so, you can look at this 2 ways. Fear is like the opposite of curiosity. So when I am fearful, I'm not open to new ideas, I'm not open to new information. But in ambiguity, I have a tremendous opportunity to put my brain in that place of receiving again. So, the idea of renewing your curiosity is to say, in this situation, the zone of the unknown, I'm in a situation where what I've learned in the past can help me, but I'm also in a new situation. So there are things that I've never learned before that I'm supposed to learn. I want to be curious here. One of the lines that I've been using, and I got this from another mentor of mine, but kind of in this next season for me and for us as we go to serve in a new role, I want to listen, I want to learn, and I want to love. And I want to leverage that ambiguity for curiosity to say, okay, I want to absorb. And one of the fastest ways to get rid of fear is to fight fear with curiosity. Because that curiosity it's like reminding your brain that there's new things to learn here, and it gets you off of all the things that are confusing, all the things that are uncertain. It brings you back to like a hunger to grow and learn.
So you feel like it, in some senses, it almost takes your eyes off of you and puts them onto what is possible.
Mm-hmm.
So you're starting to look out more or look up more when you start to ask that question, or you start to ask questions to try and learn.
Yeah.
So what would you say, a couple of things, I think. First, what would you say to the leader listening right now who they are in this place and they're feeling anxiety? Mm-hmm. They really are. Like, what would you say to them to help? Like, how do you, when you're feeling anxious around something, like, how do you shift or remind yourself to look, like, practically, like, what's a step maybe that's helped you go, I need to be curious here?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think one thing really practical is, in the situation that's ambiguous and unknown, is to draw a line in the middle of a piece of paper and say, what is in my jurisdiction or my control, and what's outside of my control. And kind of putting the things that I cannot control on one side. So I'm like, okay, well, I can't determine that. I can't dictate that. I don't control that. I don't influence that. It's over there. And then putting on the other side of a page, like, what are all the things that I do have jurisdiction over and control over, and literally like writing it down so that I can see. And then one of those things on the right side, if you're just looking at it that way, is curiosity, is learning or growth. Like my growth and my learning is my responsibility. It's nobody else's responsibility. As much as I would like for there to be somebody that's constantly committed to pouring into me, that's really not anybody's job. That's my job, is to learn and grow. So there's so much growth that happens so rapidly when you're in the zone of the unknown. So if I see it through that lens, it's like it just is a shift for me to kind of move myself. And I just say, where do I need to acknowledge my lack of knowledge? And what new knowledge do I need right now, and to pursue that in the situation?
Mm-hmm. So let me ask you this: when you have those two columns, what you can't control, what's out of your jurisdiction, what you can work on, your curiosity, do you direct it more into what you can control and try not to focus as much, or are you also trying to learn more about what you can't control? Like, how do you walk that line?
Let me answer it a different way and then see if it answers the question that you just
asked. Go ahead.
So, when I think about curiosity, it's like, okay, sometimes the path forward is not clear because I don't have knowledge or information or wisdom that I need. And so I think of that curiosity is like, maybe there are things, coming back to that illustration, maybe there are things that are on my side of the line, but I don't know them yet. So my curiosity is a process of revelation to know, okay, what can I do? That, like, what's the authority that I have here? Or what's the path forward here on my side of the line that I can learn as I grow, I can get clarity on as I learn.
Got it. I think that leaders have to it's a part of it discerning, but it is open to curiosity.
Yeah.
Because if you approach it, like you're saying, with curiosity, it can be one of your greatest development opportunities in your leadership.
Yeah. And I think I'm just kind of coming back to the pure fear factor. The best way forward with fear is to face fear. Right.
Yeah.
So if you want to, the whole test we've talked about probably on the podcast before about the spiders and the number of steps people could take towards a spider. The one who said, I'm afraid of spiders, move further towards the spider. So acknowledging the fear, okay, I feel afraid of not having enough money. I feel afraid of a loss of, relationship. I feel afraid of and then allowing that awareness to bring a sense of curiosity. Well, I have a genuine fear about I'm not saying this is my case because it's not, I have a lot of issues, but this is not one of them. But, like somebody says, I have a genuine fear of not having enough money.
Yeah.
Right? Well, where does that fear come from? What's the thing that underlies, that's under that fear?
Maybe that's a good way to say it, is when you find that area of fear, to approach it with your curiosity, you start to get more to a root so you can actually lean in and push through. But it was that unknown that brought that up to the surface so you could deal with it.
Yeah. That's good. Thanks for pressing. It brings clarity to the ambiguity.
That's what we do, man. So we're going to do, remember your foundation, renew your curiosity. And you want to move to the
third one, and then we'll take a break until our next episode, is to reevaluate your direction. And what I think happens sometimes for me personally is I get more focused on destination than direction. And I can hyper focus on getting somewhere. So David, I mentioned this, I don't know if you were in the room when this happened, but somebody asked me, if you could go back and do it all over again, what would you do differently? Like, it's kind of an interesting question, but it was in the context of being with church planters. And one of the things that hit me was in the first church plant, Stacy and I, so this is Echo's the second church that we've started. In the first one, we did everything wrong strategically. And I mean, from team to money to location to, you name it, we did it wrong. And I was learning so much. I had journals and I listened to everything I could and read everything I could. I mean, just kept, like my mind was absorbing. When we started Echo, I had a lot more clarity on strategy, and there weren't a lot of really big tactical strategic errors in the first chunk of time. Now, there's a lot of stuff we've done that we could do differently, but generally speaking, if you're training church planters, in that second church plant, it was very much like a by the book and grace of God and all of it. But as I was like praying through, what would I do differently? Like when I look back, and one of the things that struck me is so much in my life I've been so focused on the destination, and not just like the destination now, but the destination next. And so my eyes have been really like way ahead, and what that does is it makes you miss what's right in front of you. And sometimes what can happen is if your eyes are too focused on the destination, then you may even miss some of the direction that's right here in front of you. And it's not always, between here and the destination is not always a straight line. Sometimes there's a curve and you're going around a mountain and you're turning. And if you're focused, it's good to know the destination, but it should not be our obsession. And so the question of reevaluating, am I more focused on direction or destination, is a really important question. Am I more focused on the journey or where the journey's going to take me? Now, it's not that I want to be at the wrong destination 5, 10, 15, 20, or even a quarter from now, 3 months from now. But I just want to make sure I'm operating under the belief that if I'm going the right direction, I'm going to end up at the right destination. So I want to reevaluate, am I stepping in the right direction, even when my life is ambiguous?
Do you think, in seasons for you, even in this past season, I think in some ways like the destination can become blurry. So you're forced to focus on your direction more, your next couple steps, like where you're at right now. What is the part for you that, like, did you feel like you needed that unknown to pull you into the direction to see that more clearly? Or what do you feel like happened in you to shift in that way to try to focus in the direction?
I think that sometimes I mean, COVID was huge for me in this, that the future became so unclear to me. And I think this is a part of the way that God's wired me. It's the grace of God, but I see patterns, I see future, I study trends. And for the first, chunk of our ministry, I could like look at things and I'd be like, generally speaking, this is kind of where it's going. And then for the first time, it's like, boom, that's done. I can't see. I can't see past next week. I can't see past next month. And it was very frustrating for me and really hard. And then I think in all of that, it brought me back to, okay, God is the God of today.
Mm-hmm.
You know, his name is I am, but he is now. He is here. And there are things that God has for me every day of my life.
Mm-hmm.
You know, things he wants me to become, things he wants me to do, and now really does matter. And so when I can't get clarity about the future,
Mm-hmm.
and the future is foggy, I still can get clarity about today.
Mm-hmm.
I still can get a sense of, okay, this is what I'm supposed to do today. And so I think one of my really practical prayers is, God, what do you want me to do today?
Mm-hmm.
Like Holy Spirit, and you may not be a follower of Jesus and you're listening to this, and maybe it's like, what's the most important thing for me to do today?
Mm-hmm.
But I believe God is a God who is present. He's loving, he's kind, he's gracious, but he's present.
Mm-hmm.
And so he wants to guide my life today. And the ambiguity is a really good opportunity to come back and say, okay, what does God have for me today? Reevaluate my direction. So, you know, when you have clarity on the future, you can work backwards. But sometimes all you've got is today. And that's all you got to work with. You got the foundation you're standing on in today. And so reevaluating your direction is really, really important.
That's really good, because I think once you get out of this season, you'll be back to running,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't want to miss what could have happened right here
Mm-hmm.
if the direction needs to change. So maybe areas to think about if you're a leader right now too is even.
Yeah, that's good, man. There's so much more in what you just said. That's really important, because a lot of people were going the wrong direction, and then they hit ambiguity.
Yeah.
And so this principle is there's more of a meta narrative to the principle than what I just jumped into.
Yeah. Well, if you hit in this season right now, I mean, if you're a leader and you're going through that, I mean, you've already talked about what could happen in your direction, but then your direction impacts me. If you've got kids, like maybe it's like this zone of the unknown is your wake up call to say, I'm missing my kid's future.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's I'm missing the relationships. Maybe I've been focused on the wrong thing and I'm in the right place, but my eyes are in the wrong direction.
Mm-hmm.
So I need to bring those back, you know? And I mean, I think that it's kind of these seasons, if you look at it in the right way, these seasons can be a gift,
Mm-hmm.
because it could be the very thing that reevaluates where you're moving, that brings you back into a right direction.
So good, man.
So it's great.
Zone of the unknown. We got 3 more.
The zone of the unknown.
We'll
We'll
bring them back up on the next episode.
Yeah. So next month we're going to be releasing a part 2 of the zone of the unknown. So again, be sure you subscribe, like if it's been helpful, comment, share this. We're so thankful for you who do that. You can still, at this point in the summer of 2022, head over to echo.church/leadership podcast and get signed up for our email list. And that way, when we rebrand the podcast in the coming months, you're going to be kept up to date on that rebrand and all the information and ways you can continue to get better as a leader. So thanks so much for joining us. We look forward to seeing you next month.